Okay, so today we're going to talk about maintaining a hands-free lighting control system. The two previous videos that we've done were about designing and programming a hands-free lighting control system. So today we're going to talk about what do you do now that you got it installed? And I need to make changes maybe to the system, or I want to update software, things of that nature. So we're going to take just a couple of minutes. We're going to go into the software. We're going to talk about some of the key parameters that can be changed and modified. Uh, Quickly show you how to set up a time clock event and show you some of the screens, maybe where you want to look at changing up or updating the software and potentially tying your Vive hub, which I have installed up here, into your network. All right, so we're going to jump into the software. Once you log into your Vive hub, now first off, you'll notice the Vive hub will flash, the antenna will flash white LED once every 10 seconds roughly. We call it a heartbeat, and it just lets you know that the hub is on, it's powered, and it's operating normally. Usually that's the first thing I check if for whatever reason we're having an issue with the system. It's maybe not performing properly, it's not doing what we've asked it to do or what we've programmed it to do. I want to see if there's power there, right? So you just watch the hub. You just saw it flash right there. Make sure that it's flashing. If it's not flashing, then you need to check the power. If it is flashing, then we know at least that's powered up, and maybe there's something else that's going on. So that's going to be the first thing. I've already logged into the Wi-Fi of that hub, and I'm now on the kind of the splash page of that hub. So I want to show you a couple of key features here. Number one, we'll go into the rooms first. So I just tap on the rooms area, and it'll come up here briefly. And so I've got one room programmed into this area, so I'm going ahead and select on that. There's a couple of things that show up here. We have energy. That's real-time energy usage. So that is going to give me how much energy I'm saving right now. The next one is just to control the lights. So if I real quickly wanted to go in and turn the lights on or off, and this is going to control this 2x2 that's up above my head here, I can turn the light off. I could turn it back on. Make sure I'm communicating to the proper space that I want to make some modifications for. Now I want to go to devices and settings, and this is really where the power of the system comes in. So you'll see a couple of different things here. The first is room type, not assigned. That's not a big deal. Right below that, you'll see occupancy. So if I go into occupancy, it gives me a couple of different things. First is the status. So the status of my occupancy in that area, and this is based on an area. So an area could be an open office space, a private office, a storage room, a lobby, could be the exterior lighting. Those are all areas, and they all operate together as far as occupancy goes. So right now it's enabled. If I wanted to disable that space, in other words, I want to ignore the occupancy sensors for a certain period of time, I can do that right here on this page. I can click disabled, and it will go ahead and disable the aux sensors, and now those lights will stay on or off, whichever state I leave them in. I'll still be able to turn them on and off manually with my wall control, but the occupancy sensor will no longer control those lights. So I'm going to cancel out of that. Right below that is the most critical piece here for occupancy. This is where I set my behavior for all of my lights. So I'm going to go ahead and click on lights there, and you'll see the first thing that pops up is behavior, occupancy, vacancy, or vacancy only. So the first one, occ/vac, means whenever I walk into the space, the lights are going to automatically turn on. And when I leave the space, or when it becomes unoccupied, the lights are going to automatically turn off. Okay, that's traditionally how we've known occupancy sensors to behave. More recently, vacancy only has become a little bit more predominant, especially in the energy codes. And what that means is whenever I walk into the space, the lighting's not going to automatically turn on. I, as the occupant, have to manually turn the lights on via some sort of wall control. However, whenever I leave the space and the space becomes unoccupied, it will now turn off for me. So there's a little subtle difference there. And really, that has to do with being able to save just a little bit more energy than with a standard occupancy sensor. So I'm going to leave it on occ/vacc, which means the lights will automatically turn on, but I can tell it what level to turn on to. So if I hit when occupied, you'll see that right now, whenever the sensor senses occupancy, the lights are going to turn on to 50%. Now I can change that. I can have it go, 30%. I could have it to 100%. So I can modify that. Energy code right now in Pennsylvania requires that if you're going to do an occupancy/vacancy setting, you can only go to 50%. So I can't turn the lights on to 100% automatically. If I do vacancy only, that's a different story. But whenever I do occupancy, I can only go to 50%. So I've set my lights so that whenever my occupancy sensor picks up movement in the space, the lights are going to turn on to 50%. Likewise, I can set the unoccupied level. Now, traditionally, that would be 0%, right? I mean, we would want the lights to turn off. There are instances, however, where we may not want those lights to turn off to 100 to 0. A good example of this recently that I programmed was in restrooms where we had both normal and emergency control. So the normal lights, whenever the space became unoccupied, we took those to 0%. The emergency lights, whenever the space became unoccupied, we dimmed down to 10%. We left it at 10%. So you're using a little bit more energy than you would traditionally if the lights went all the way off. However, with LEDs, it's minuscule. And the benefit there is whenever someone walks into that space, when they first open that door, there's a little bit of light in there. And it just kind of gives you a little bit more reassurance, a little bit more comfort walking into the space. Obviously, the occupancy sensor detects movement. The lights come on to the predetermined level. But if somebody's in there for a long time or the sensor triggers, whatever, at least they're not left in the dark. And I keep that low light level with the emergency lights in that space. So that's an example of where we might want to have the unoccupied level set at something other than 0%. I can also do this per light. So if I have a space that has multiple zones in it, multiple power packs, I can have each one of those behave differently on unoccupied and occupied levels. I'm not going to get into the details of that because we can spend a lot of time just going through the nuances of it. But know that this is where I'm going to modify the behavior of my occupancy sensor, my lights whenever my occupancy sensor detects motion or goes unoccupied. Whenever I'm done setting my levels, I hit save, and now that's saved to the system and will get uploaded to the power pack. You'll notice below that it says sensor settings. So my sensitivity and my timeout are set on my occupancy sensor itself. Okay, so typically out of the box, sensitivity is set to the most sensitive and timeout is set at 15 minutes. If you need to modify that, it's just a quick change on the back of this. You push a couple of buttons. There's no dip switches. There's no little twisty knobs or anything like that you have to get into. But it's a very, very quick, easy modification on the sensor itself. And then below that, I have wireless range. I can extend the wireless range. So if I have a long hallway maybe, and the occupancy sensors are outside of the range that we would normally feel comfortable as far as communication goes, I can use the hub to sort of repeat the signal further down to a power pack downstream. That's typically used during programming and not a feature that you would adjust when you're maintaining the system. All right, so that's occupancy. We'll go back here real quick. Underneath that, I have tuning. Tuning is just setting the high end or the low end trim of that power pack. So a good example would be I replace all of my 2x4s. Maybe they were 3-lamp T8s, and I go and I put maybe a high output flat panel in. And now I've got a lot more light in the space, and the occupants are all complaining, hey, there's too much light in here. We want it a little bit dimmer. I can go into this setting and I can actually set the top end of those fixtures so that they're not as bright. A lot of times we'll see that knocked down to 80%, sometimes 75%. The value being that's now the new high output, or the top output of that fixture. And that energy that I took out is savings directly back to you as the building owner. So if I were to change my tuning down, instead of 100% like I have here, if I were to go in and set it at, let's say, 90%, now I'd be saving 10% of my energy every time those lights came on, even if the occupant drove them all the way up to their full output. So that's a way to save energy, but also to maintain a comfort level of lighting in the space, which is important. Not just the energy aspect, but also the comfort level. I can also set the low end trim of the fixture. So we would typically use this when we are dimming LED lamps, something that's using a line voltage dimming. They tend to get unstable sometimes whenever I get really, really low. So if I want to, and they'll flicker, and we've probably all seen that, right? If you dim an LED lamp low enough, it can sometimes flicker. So if I want to make sure that I am above that flicker point, I can go into the low end trim, and I can set that low end level right before it starts to flicker, so that now I've got a really smooth dimming curve from top to bottom. I don't have any flicker, and whenever I hit off, it'll just drop out before that flicker starts to occur. So that's what I use low end trim for. And that's tuning. So we'll back out of tuning. And it looks like I went one level too far. And now we'll get into daylighting. So we've got occupancy, tuning, and daylighting. So if you have a space that has perimeter windows, more times than not, you'll see a daylight sensor in there. And that daylight sensor will be dimming the first one or two rows away from that window. So those fixtures will traditionally be a little bit lower in their light output than the rest of the fixtures further into the space. So that's daylight harvesting. There's a couple of things that we can do with daylight harvesting. The first is, just like occupancy, I can enable or disable that. I found that daylighting typically takes a little bit of training and conditioning for the occupants. A lot of people are not used to daylight harvesting. It's a rather new feature, or a new requirement. I guess it's not really new to lighting controls, but it's a new requirement in the energy code. So a lot of people are not used to it. So it can be a little unnerving when you're looking at a row of fixtures, and this one along the windows is really, really dim, and as you get further into the space, they get brighter and brighter. So if you have somebody that is just not going to be satisfactory for, you can disable that feature. Wouldn't suggest that. It's there for a reason. It's there to help you save energy. But if you have to, you can disable daylight harvesting. Also, I can do two things with daylight harvesting. Whenever I get to my low end, I can take that fixture all the way to off, which saves the maximum amount of energy, but also in the space, it feels a little awkward whenever I have a row of lights that are physically off. Or I can just take those lights down to the lowest level, to my low end trim. That's traditionally how I program daylight harvesting. Is I dim them down to as low as I can get them, but I keep them on. And that's the feature that's right there, that second line down. Allow dimmable lights to turn off, and I can either select yes or no there. Out of the box, that's going to be selected as yes. So if you have a hands-free lighting control system, a Vive system installed, and those daylight rows are off whenever it's really bright outside, more than likely this setting has been set to yes. And you can quickly go in, you can tap this, change it to no, and now instead of those lights turning off, they'll just stay at a low level, at the dim level. Below that, I can also change my target brightness. So this is the best way to describe this is how aggressive my daylight harvesting is going to be. Whenever I go in and select it, the lower the level, the more aggressive I'm going to be. The higher the level, the less aggressive. So if I were to take my level all the way down to 1, that means my fixtures are going to dim to the lowest possible level very, very quickly with just a little bit of natural light coming into the space. Conversely, if I change it to, let's say, 11, that means it's going to take a lot more natural light coming into the space before those lights really start to dim down to their low end. Okay, so this is something you can kind of play with. Obviously, the more aggressive you are with your daylight harvesting, the more energy you'll save. The less aggressive, the less energy you'll save. But it really comes down to a comfort level. And we found that, like I said before, the comfort of the occupants in the space really should take precedence, because if the lights are a distraction to them, then we get into worker productivity, and there's just a lot of challenges there. And we really don't want to hinder people's work. We want the lights should really, and the lighting control system should really just kind of operate kind of out of the view of the occupants, and should just really work. So this is something you can kind of tweak and play around with, so that the occupants in your space feel comfortable with how the lighting is set. So I'm going to set mine back to 5, hit save, and I can also do that per row. I'm not going to get into the daylight harvesting rows, but we can have different rows coming off that window dimmed at different levels if we need to. And that's a feature that we would set up during programming. All right, so that's daylight harvesting. Further on down, you'll see that there's a list of all the devices that we have programmed in the space. So I have 2 wall controls, I have an occupancy sensor, a daylight sensor, and then I have 2 lights. Those would be my actual load devices, which Ray talked about in the first video series that we did. So I have a dimmer here, and then I have a power pack, a 0 to 10 volt power pack. And if I'm in the space and I'm trying to determine what lights are controlled by what power pack, I can hit the flash button, and those lights will flash. And this one should flash for me. So now it's indicating, okay, that power pack is talking to that device. Okay, that is all the features that we're going to go over right now within the room. Now I want to back out and kind of look at the system on a macro level and talk about some of the things we can do with the programming and some of the new features that are in the latest software revision for Vive. Okay, so we're back. Had to wait for my phone. It's an older phone here to jump back to the main screen. So a couple of things we're going to talk about here. In the upper right-hand corner, you'll notice a Vive Hub icon with a gear next to it. If we select on that, this kind of is all the settings for your Vive Hub. This is where the name, the SSID, the software updates, the BACnet integration, all these types of things are going to occur. And I just clicked on API. This is a new feature. API is a method of integration that's kind of different than BACnet and relatively new. Your IT departments will be familiar with it. So Lutron has an API resource now in Vive if you want to request data or information from the Vive Hub, such as status of an area. Is it occupied? Is it unoccupied? What are the daylight sensors reading? What's the next time schedule? Things of that nature. Lighting levels in an area. That's all information, data, and parameters you can get through the API. You'll see here software update. So the software revision is 1.12. That's the latest version. So software updates are always free from Lutron for Vive. And you can go on to lutron.com/Vive software, download the most recent software, and upload it to your Vive Hub. It's very, very simple. I'll show you here. If I hit software update, it takes you right through. There's a whole checklist here that'll step you how to do it, and you can upload it yourself. It's not anything that's going to cost any money from Lutron. So that's a really nice feature. Network and connectivity is another parameter that you may or may not want to set. So we'll select that real quick. Give it a second here. There it goes. So a couple of things here that I want to go over. First, Vive Wi-Fi. So our Vive Hub has a Wi-Fi antenna on it. It will broadcast its SSID. So if you're in a public space and your Wi-Fi, your Vive Hub is broadcasting its SSID, and somebody walks in and they go into settings, it's going to pop up. Now they won't necessarily be able to get on it because it's going to be password protected. However, it will be broadcasting. You can hide that SSID, meaning it will not automatically broadcast. So just somebody coming into the space would not be able to find that on their Wi-Fi networks that are available to log into. You can also turn it off. Now, if you turn it off, realize I have to have a physical connection to that Vive Hub in order to access it now, because I'm not going to be able to access it via Wi-Fi. And that may be preferable for your space. It just depends. But that's what you would need to do, is actually physically connect it, Cat5 cable, and it would be landed on your network switch, and then you'd go in and you'd actually set up the IP addresses. You can either do static IP or DHCP. Again, if you want to get into that level, we at Synergy are here to help you with that, and we can work with you and your IT department to make sure that that's done properly and that you have access. But that's all done right here within the settings for the Vive Hub. You can also change the password for the Vive Hub if you feel like it's been compromised or whatever. You have somebody leave maybe that had access to it. So right now I am actually connected to my to the Ethernet, and you'll see it says connected, and it gives you all the information there as far as IP address, subnet mask, gateway, your DNS server. And that's all. Those are all parameters that we would typically get from the IT department and input here and here, or if it's DHCP, it'll grab that automatically from the network. All right. So we'll back out of that. Okay, so last thing I want to go over real quick is schedules. So if I click on schedules here, it will take us into our scheduling app, our scheduling feature. You can see that I don't have any events scheduled. Click on the plus button, can name my event. So we're gonna do just name exterior. We'll call this off. All right. So I'm just gonna walk through maybe turning the exterior lights off. So I select days of the week that I want this to happen. So we'll do this all the way through the week. I could also select a specific range of dates. So if I knew, let's say it's a university or college, and over Christmas break, I want the lights to do something specific, or I want to disable lock sensors or something of that nature, I can select that date range and it will only occur during that date range. This is going to be a perpetual weekly thing that I'm programming here. So we're going to just leave it on weekly. Then I can give it, when I want it to start and then when I want it to end. And I can give exceptions on holidays if I want. Hit next, and now I can either set this event to occur based on time of day, 5 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock at night, whatever, or I can do it based on sunrise, sunset. So if I'm doing something that is exterior, which is this example here, I may want to base it off of the natural light, the daylight out in the space, outside, versus a specific time of day. So we're going to say at sunrise, and the areas that I want to modify or I want to be controlled by this event. So if I have, pardon me, if I have a list of areas here that are programmed to that hub, I can go through and I can select which areas I would like to have be adjusted during this time. So we're going to select room, hit next, and now I can do two things. I can either control the lights, and or I can modify how the occupancy sensor behaves. Now that only works if I have an aux sensor in that space, obviously. For exterior lights, I may not have an aux sensor, so this may be somewhat of a silly example, but I can do either or. So for here, I'm gonna actually control lights, we'll hit next, and now I'm gonna tell the system what I want it to do whenever that time event occurs. So I want to turn the exterior lights off. So dimmable lights are going to go to 0%. I can change the fade rate on this. So instead of 2 seconds, which is the default, I can have anywhere from a 0-second fade rate, which means it happens immediately, or I can have a 90-minute fade rate. So it's going to happen over a very, very long period of time, an hour and a half. That, could be used in specific applications such as restaurants or maybe some sort of lobby space where I want to transition from one scene to another. But in general, 90 minutes is not used for most applications. So I want to probably keep it short and sweet. The default's fine for me. I'm going to leave it as 2 seconds. Hit done. And then if I wanted to, I could adjust each light individually. So if I wanted some lights to turn off, other lights maybe to just dim back, I can set that feature there. I hit save, and now that event will be saved and will continue to occur throughout time until I turn it off. So here's the summary of the event. Now, if I want to, I can push the test event, and the lights will actually go into whatever level I program them to do. That's useful in that you can make sure that you've programmed it properly. However, realize that if you've programmed to turn lights off and somebody's in that space and you hit test event, those lights are going to go off, and you better be there to turn those lights back on. That's happened more than a couple of times, I think, to people that are testing time clock events. They don't realize that it's going to affect the people that are in that space immediately, and there's no way to undo that test. Whenever you test the event, it happens, and there it is. So we'll hit done, and now you can see it shows up on my today's events. And then if I go back to my home screen, it'll actually tell you next events, what the next event is. Right below that, I'll just real quickly hit this. There's an alerts. The battery operated devices that are in our system will send an alert whenever the battery's getting close to end of life, and or if the battery has actually failed or the device itself has failed. You'll see an alert here that will just alert you that you've got an issue and you need to replace the battery. Replacing batteries or losing a battery does not change the programming. The programmer will remain. So once I put the new battery back in, the system will work just like it always has. All right, hope that was useful. I'm sure you'll have some questions. We'll probably go over a couple of questions later, but feel free to reach out to Synergy. We're here to help you guys when you're designing a system, if you need to program it, and also if you have an existing system and you need some help maintaining it. All right, thanks. Have a great day.